Muslim Institute is a think tank dedicated to promoting peace, stability, prosperity, and leadership in the Muslim world through independent research and policy development. The Institute was founded by Hazrat Sultan Muhammad Ali, its guiding inspiration. The Institute is one of the organizations that draw its principal motivation from his spiritual inheritance. Hazrat Sultan Muhammad Ali Sahib represents the towering legacy of two great Sufi saints and intellectual revolutionaries, Hazrat Sakhi Sultan Bahoo and Hazrat Sakhi Sultan Asghar Ali Sahib. As its patron-in-chief, he brings his spiritual values of a relentless pursuit of the truth and commitment to the perfection of the human condition to the organization as its guiding principles. As a research-oriented think tank, Muslim Institute carries out research activities in a wide array of fields and areas under the direction and stewardship of its chairman, Sahibzada Sultan Ahmad Ali. The Institute's research and policy development teams, based in its fully equipped facilities in Islamabad and London, are divided across thematic desks, each of which are dedicated to research in specific and diverse areas of academic work ranging from Muslim history and cultural heritage to modern socio-economic policy development, and from Islamic law and jurisprudence to international relations and politics, including specialist desks dedicated to Kashmir, Junagadh and Hazrat Sultan Bahoo. The Institute's vast range of activities include multiple research projects, public events including roundtable interactions, conferences, seminars, training workshops, expert lectures, and writing and publication of research and policy papers. One such project of international renown and impact is the Muslim Debate, which brings together the foremost intellectual authorities in the world together on a digital platform.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome back to the 6th dialogue of this second day of the Maulana Rumi and Hazrat Sultan Bahoo International Conference. We're going to start with the Kalam, after which I'll introduce both the distinguished speakers and we'll get the session going.
Bismillah Ism Allah da نال شفاعت سرور عالم چھٹ سی عالم سارا حدوں بے حد درود نبی نو جس دا سارا ہو میں قربان تنہا تو سونا حضرت باہو جنا ملیا نبی سہارا
Jazakallah, mashallah. We're going to start off with our two distinguished speakers for this session. First, we have Professor Dr. Abbasin Yusufzai, former chairman of the Pashto Department in Islamia College, University, Peshawar, followed by, his remarks will be followed by Dr. Marcia Hermanson from Loyola University, Chicago, United States. First, I'd like to request Honorable Professor Dr. Abbasin Yusufzai.
اعوذ باللہ من الشیطان الرجیم بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم السلام علیکم معزز خواتین و حضرات، مجھے جو موضوع دیا گیا ہے زہد، اخلاق اور کردار، تصوف از روئے قرآن، بجائے زبانی بولنے کے میں نے سوچا کہ لکھ کے آپ کا وقت بچاؤں، کیونکہ زبانی بہت طویل بولا جاتا ہے اور لکھ کے اس میں اختصار آ جاتا ہے۔ تصوف کا موضوع تاریخ ہے نہ جغرافیہ، ریاضی ہے نہ جیومیٹری، اور یہی وجہ ہے کہ اس کے بارے میں کی گئی ہر وضاحت ہمیشہ تشنہ دکھائی دیتی ہے۔ اللہ تعالیٰ کی معرفت اور قرب و رضا کی راہوں کا جاننا اور اس پر آخر دم تک چلنا سلوک کا مقصد ہے، اور یہ مجاہدہ ہی سے ممکن ہوتا ہے۔ جہاد کے معنی محنت، سعی اور جد و جہد کے ہیں۔ جہاد کی سب سے اعلیٰ قسم خود اپنے نفس کے ساتھ جہاد کرنا ہے، جو جہاد اکبر کہلاتا ہے۔ اپنے نفس کو قابو میں رکھنا اخلاقیات کی بنیادیں استوار کرتا ہے۔ ایک نظر میں کچھ سے کچھ ہے میری دنیا حواس، ایک نظر میں کچھ سے کچھ ہے میری دنیا حواس، ہوش جو تھا بے ہوشی ہے، بے ہوشی اب ہوش ہے۔ تصوف کی ابتدا حضرت آدم علیہ السلام سے ہوتی ہے، جب انہوں نے اپنی شریک حیات کے ہمراہ رب کے حضور تزکیہ نفس کے سلسلے میں التجا کی کہ ربنا ظلمنا انفسنا وان لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنکونن من الخاسرین۔ ترجمہ: اے ہمارے رب، ہم نے اپنی جانوں پر ظلم کیا، اور اگر آپ ہماری مغفرت نہ فرمائیں گے اور ہم پر رحم نہ فرمائیں گے تو واقعی ہمارا بہت بڑا نقصان ہو جائے گا۔ گویا رب العزت نے انسان کو اس دھرتی پر بھیجنے سے پہلے اسے یہ سبق بھی دیا کہ جب بھی تم سے شریعت میں کوتاہی ہو تو تم طریقت سے اس کی تلافی کرو۔ لہٰذا ثابت ہوا کہ شریعت و طریقت کا چولی دامن کا ساتھ۔ تصوف کا منصب و منشا ہی اخلاقیات کی بہتری ہے، بگڑے ہوئے کو سیدھے راستے پر ڈالنا اور ان کے دلوں میں نیکی اور سچائی کی لگن پیدا کرنی ہے، ایک دوسرے سے پیار محبت اور بھائی چارے کے ساتھ رہنا ہے، بھٹکے ہوئے کو راستے پر لانا ہے اور ان کی حقیقی منزل کی جانب رہنمائی کرنا ہی تصوف ہے، اور یہ اولیاء کرام کا کام ہے۔ تصوف خوشخوئی کا نام ہے، جو زیادہ نیک خو ہے وہ زیادہ تصوف کے قریب ہے۔ نیک خوئی 3 طرح کی ہوتی ہے، ایک مخلوق کے ساتھ اور دوسری اللہ تعالی کے ساتھ، جبکہ تیسری اپنے ساتھ۔ مخلوق کے ساتھ نیک خوئی یہ ہے کہ رضا الہی کے لیے مخلوق کی صحبت کا بار برداشت کیا جائے، یعنی ان کی صحبت کا حق ادا کیا جائے۔ اللہ تعالیٰ کے ساتھ نیک خوئی یہ ہے کہ بندہ اس کی رضا اور کیے پر راضی ہو، اور اپنے ساتھ نیک خوئی یہ ہے کہ اپنے نفس کو گمراہ ہونے سے بچایا جائے۔ یہ چند جملے میں دوبارہ پڑھ لیتا ہوں۔ نیک خوئی 3 طرح کی ہوتی ہے۔ تصوف خوشخوئی کا نام ہے، جو زیادہ نیک خو ہے وہ زیادہ تصوف کے قریب ہے۔ نیک خوئی 3 طرح کی ہوتی ہے، ایک مخلوق کے ساتھ، دوسری اللہ تعالیٰ کے ساتھ، جبکہ تیسری اپنے ساتھ۔ مخلوق کے ساتھ نیک خوئی یہ ہے کہ رضا الہی کے لیے مخلوق کی صحبت کا بار برداشت کیا جائے، یعنی ان کی صحبت کا حق ادا کیا جائے۔ اللہ تعالیٰ کے ساتھ نیک خوئی یہ ہے کہ بندہ اللہ کی رضا اور کیے پر راضی ہو، اور اپنے ساتھ نیک خوئی یہ ہے کہ اپنے نفس کو گمراہ ہونے سے بچایا جائے۔ پروفیسر داور خان داؤد لکھتے ہیں، اخلاقیات ہماری معاشرتی اور سماجی زندگی کی ایک اہم ضرورت ہے۔ تصوف کا بنیادی مقصد یہ ہے کہ انسان اپنے آپ میں اچھے اخلاق پیدا کرے اور لوگوں کو مادی نجاست اور غلاظت سے پاک و صاف کرے۔ تصوف رسم ہے نہ علم، بلکہ اس سے مراد اخلاق کی اصلاح ہے۔ اس لیے تصوف کو علوم اور رسوم کے بجائے ضابطۂ اخلاق کہنا زیادہ مناسب ہوگا۔ تصوف اگر رسم ہوتی تو اس کے لیے مجاہدہ کافی تھا، اگر علم ہوتا تو تعلیم اور تعلم کے ذریعے حاصل ہوتا۔ یہ دراصل آغاز سے انجام تک اخلاق ہی اخلاق ہے۔ دنیا میں اگر عظمت کا کوئی پیمانہ اور معیار ہے تو وہ اخلاق ہی ہے۔ خالق کائنات نے اپنے محبوب پیغمبر صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم کی تعریف میں یوں ارشاد فرمایا، وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَىٰ خُلْقٍ عَظِيمٍ۔ ترجمہ: بے شک آپ کے اخلاق عظیم ہے، پیمانہ اخلاق ہے۔ کلیم شنواری لکھتے ہیں، کسی نے تصوف کو ایک حیران آباد کے نام سے موسوم کیا تو کسی نے اسے تہذیب نفس کا نام دیا ہے۔ کچھ لوگوں کے نزدیک تصوف اخلاق فاضلہ کا دوسرا نام ہے، تو بعض کا کہنا ہے کہ صوفی وہ ہوتا ہے جو حق تعالیٰ سے اپنا معاملہ صاف رکھے۔ ابو محمد الجریری رحمۃ اللہ علیہ فرماتے ہیں، تصوف اعلیٰ اخلاق کو اختیار کرنے اور پست اخلاق سے پرہیز کا نام ہے۔ تصوف اور اخلاق کے باہمی میل جول کو حضرت امام محمد باقر حسین بن علی کچھ یوں بیان فرما رہے ہیں: تصوف نیک خوئی کا نام ہے، اور جو شخص جتنا زیادہ خوش خلق ہوگا اتنا ہی وہ اچھا صوفی ہوگا۔ اس بات کے بعد ہم وثوق سے کہہ سکتے ہیں کہ تصوف دراصل اخلاقیات ہی کا نام ہے۔ لوگوں کو اپنے راستے کی جانب راغب کرنا اور ان کو کامیاب زندگی کی راہوں پر گامزن کرنا ہی درس اخلاق ہے۔ امام ابو القاسم قشیری رحمۃ اللہ علیہ نے ولی اللہ کے حوالے سے 2 باتیں ضروری قرار کی ہیں۔ نمبر 1، اللہ تعالیٰ ایک لحظہ کے لیے بھی اس کو نفس کے حوالے نہ کرے گا، بلکہ ہمیشہ اس کی حفاظت کرتا رہے گا۔ نمبر 2، اس کی عبادت اور اطاعت اس درجہ مسلسل ہو کہ درمیان میں کسی معصیت کا ارتکاب نہ ہو۔ اگر کبھی ارتکاب ہو جائے تو وہ اللہ کی بارگاہ میں گڑ گڑا کر اپنی خطا کی معافی چاہتا ہے، اطاعت و فرمان برداری کی جانب پلٹ آتا ہے، اور پھر توبہ و ندامت اس کے گناہ کے دبے دھو ڈالتی۔ وہ اللہ کی ہدایت اور تقوی سے خارج نہیں ہوتا، بلکہ توبہ و ندامت کا عجز و نیاز اور فریاد و زاری کا خلوص کبھی اس کو اس درجہ سے بھی بلند کر دیتا ہے جہاں وہ اس سے پہلے تھا۔ اسی لیے تو اقبال نے کہا: اپنے من میں ڈوب کر پا جا سراغ زندگی، تو اگر میرا نہیں بنتا نہ بن اپنا تو بن۔ اپنے من میں ڈوب کر زندگی کا سراغ پانا بظاہر ایک سادہ سا جملہ لگتا ہے، مگر اس کے پیچھے معنی اور عمل کا ایک سمندر موجود ہے۔ اس سے خودی اور خودداری جیسے کلمات جنم لیتے ہیں، کیونکہ معرفت ذات ہی معرفت الہی کا زینہ ہے۔ گویا بقول میر: پہنچا جو آپ کو تو میں پہنچا خدا کے تئیں، معلوم اب ہوا کہ بہت میں بھی دور تھا۔ اور یہی وہ نقطہ ہے جس صوفی نے اسے پا لیا وہ امر ہو گیا۔ نفس کو قابو میں رکھنا، عبادت اور اطاعت کا تسلسل اور معصیت سے دور رہنا اور غلطی کی صورت میں معافی کا طلبگار رہنا، تمام چیزیں اخلاقیات کے زمرے میں آتی۔ حضرت علی حجویری کشف المحجوب میں لکھتے ہیں: صوفی کو صوفی اس لیے کہا جاتا ہے کہ وہ اخلاق و معاملات کو مہذب کر لیتا ہے اور طبیعت کی آفتوں سے پاک صاف ہو جاتا ہے۔ حقیقی صوفی وہی ہے جس کا دل کدورت سے پاک ہو جاتا ہے۔ صوفیاء کرام امن و آشتی کے بیج کی مانند ہوتے ہیں۔ یہ بیج یعنی تصوف فطرت نے سرزمین بر صغیر کے ہر حصے میں مختلف ناموں سے بو کر ہر خطے کے لوگوں کی ضروریات کا خیال رکھا ہے، اور آج میڈیا کے اس برق رفتار دور میں دنیا کا ہر کونا آپ کی نظروں کے سامنے اور سماعت کے قریب ہے، اور پھر روح کے سامنے تو صدیوں کا فاصلہ لمحوں کی بات ہے۔ آپ دل کی آنکھ سے تمام پوشیدہ خانوں کا نظارہ کر سکتے ہیں، دل کے کانوں سے مبہم آوازوں کو سماعت کر سکتے ہیں، مگر اس کے لیے بقول اقبال دل بینا کی ضرورت ہے، اور دل بینا کا سرچشمہ پانا خلق عظیم سے ممکن ہے۔ دل بینا بھی کر خدا سے طلب، آنکھ کا نور دل کا نور نہیں۔ اللہ نے اپنے بندوں میں جس خاصیت کو سب سے ضروری اور اہم قرار دیا ہے وہ نفیس اخلاق کی موجودگی، اور معاشرے کی اصلاح کے لیے جس چیز کو ناگزیر سمجھتا ہے وہ مبلغین و مصلحین کی اخلاقی بلندی ہے، اور کیوں نہ ہو۔ ہم جانتے ہیں کہ یعنی جو رحم نہیں کرتا اس پر رحم نہیں کیا جائے گا۔ اخلاقیات انسان کی نمایاں صفت ہے، اور یہ وہ خوبی ہے جو اللہ اپنے نبیوں، رسولوں اور ہر برگزیدہ بندے کو ودیعت کرتا ہے۔ یہی وجہ ہے کہ اللہ تعالیٰ نے اپنے 1,24,000 کم و بیش پیغمبروں کو جو مشترکہ فضیلت عطا کی وہ خلق عظیم اور بلندی کردار ہے۔ حتیٰ کہ جب موسیٰ علیہ السلام کو فرعون کے پاس جانے کا حکم دیا تو بھی نرمی اور خوش خلقی یعنی قول سدید کی ہدایت فرمائی، حالانکہ سامنے وقت کا ظالم و جابر نافرمان اور مشرک تھا۔ عیسیٰ علیہ السلام کو مبعوث فرمایا تو نرمی، تواضع اور مسیحائی کی اوصاف عطا کی، اور پھر اپنے محبوب خاتم النبیین حضرت محمد مصطفیٰ صلی اللہ علیہ وآلہ وسلم کو عرب کے جاہل اور سنگ دل لوگوں میں رسالت کا فریضہ ادا کرتے ہوئے تبلیغ دین کا کام سونپا۔ بے شک لوگوں میں سے اچھا وہ ہے جو اللہ کے کنبے کے ساتھ اچھا، یعنی خدمت خلق میں نرمی اچھے اخلاق کا تقاضا کرتی ہے۔ گویا اخلاقیات انسان کی اولین اور ناگزیر ضرورت ہے، جس کو کام میں لا کر اللہ کے نیک بندے مخلوق خدا کے نہ صرف ظاہری حالات کی درستگی یقینی بنا سکتے ہیں، بلکہ ان کے باطن کا تزکیہ، ان کے قلب کی تطہیر بھی ممکن بنا لیتے۔ یہی وجہ ہے کہ اولیاء اللہ اور صوفی صافی نہ صرف خود اخلاق حسنہ اپناتے ہیں بلکہ سلوک کی راہ کے ہر سالک کو یہ خوبی اپنانے کی تلقین کرتے ہیں۔ دراصل تصوف تو ہے ہی انسان کو انسان سے جوڑنے اور پھر انسانوں کو اللہ سے ملانے کا وسیلہ، اور یقیناً اس مقصد براری کے لیے تصوف کا بنیادی مقصد ہی اخلاقیات، معاشرت اور زندگی کی اصلاح ہے۔ نیز لوگوں کو مادی یعنی ظاہری و باطنی نجاستوں اور غلاظتوں سے پاک و صاف کرنا، نفسی برائیوں سے اجتناب برتنے کی تلقین کرنا، اچھائی کی جانب ترغیب دلانا، باہمی معاملات میں نفاست و شائستگی اپنانے کا درس دینا اور عملی زندگی میں اسے یقینی بنانا ہے، کیونکہ انسان کی پہچان کا اولین ذریعہ اس کے اخلاق ہی ہیں۔ گویا مخلوقات کے دلوں کو فتح کرنا حسن خلق کی مرہون منت ہے، اور یہی وہ کام ہے جو صوفی کرتا ہے۔ بلکہ حقیقت تو یہ ہے کہ دنیا کی تاریخ میں سلطنتوں کے ساتھ ساتھ دلوں کو فتح کرنے کے کام میں تلوار سے زیادہ اصحاب رسول کے بعد اور اس کردار کے حامل اولیاء کرام تھے، جن کے اعمال صالحہ دل موہ لینے والی تعلیمات اور اخلاق حسنہ نے انسانوں کے جسموں پر ہی نہیں بلکہ دلوں پر بھی حکومت کی۔ یہی وجہ ہے کہ آج تاریخ بڑے بڑے حکمرانوں کو خراج عقیدت پیش نہیں کرتی، بلکہ ان بوریا نشینوں کی تعریف میں رطب اللسان ہے، جنہوں نے اپنی محافل و مجالس اور صحبت نیک کے وسیلے سے عوام الناس کے ظاہر و باطن کو سنوار کر ان کی دین و دنیا کا سامان کیا۔ بقول اقبال، نہ پوچھن خرقہ پوشوں کی ارادت ہو تو دیکھن کھو، ید بیزالیے بیٹے ہیں اپنی آستینوں میں۔ تصوف کلی یا جزوی طور پر ابتدا ہی سے انسان کے ساتھ مختلف صورتوں میں وابستہ رہی ہے، لیکن مسلمانوں نے اس کو زیادہ روح پرور، پرتاثیر اور مقبول بنا دیا ہے۔ ڈاکٹر عبدالرشید رقم تراز ہیں۔ صاحب کردار صوفیوں نے اپنے دور کی سماجی اور سیاسی زندگیوں میں اہم اور قابل ذکر کردار ادا کیا ہے۔ انہوں نے سماجی برائیوں کے خلاف جہاد کیا اور حرف حق کو عام کرنے کی جدوجہد میں مقتل و زندہ کا بھی خندہ پیشانی سے استقبال کیا۔ مصلحت اور زمانہ سازی سے ان کو کبھی علاقہ ہی نہیں رہا، حق کی تائید و حمایت میں ہمیشہ کمر بستہ رہے۔ شریعت کے تو کچھ حدود و قیود ضرور ہے، مگر طریقت کے بارے میں بسیار مطالعے اور مختصر و محدود مشاہدے اور تجربے کے بعد ہم اس نتیجے پر پہنچ چکے ہیں کہ تصوف کو منطق کے ترازو میں تولنا اور دلیل کے فیتے سے ماپنا بیکار ہے۔ یہ وہ مراحل ہیں جہاں عقل کے پر جل جاتے۔ شاعر انسانیت حضرت رحمان بابا نے صوفیاء کرام کی اخلاقی بلندی کی وجہ سے ان سے لوگوں کی عقیدت اور اللہ کی محبت کا تذکرہ کچھ یوں کیا ہے کہ پیو قدم تر عرش پوری رسی، مالی دل در رفتار درویشانو، عمر خلق زیارت کا پسل مرگا چه بازار وی په مزار د درویشانو، بادشاہان د دې دنیا واړه پراته دي لکه خاورې په دربار د درویشانو۔ منظوم ترجمہ: پہنچا ہے ایک گام میں از فرش تاب عرش، پہنچا ہے ایک گام میں از فرش تاب عرش، دیکھی ہوئی ہے میں نے یہ رفتار اولیاء، رہتا ہے ایک ہجوم خلائق مزار پر، رہتا ہے ایک ہجوم خلائق مزار پر، لگتا ہے بعد مرگ بھی بازار اولیاء، سب ہے پڑے جہاں کے سلاطین زی حشم، سب ہیں پڑے جہاں کے سلاطین زی حشم، مانند خاک بر سر دربار اولیاء۔ اس رنج و علم اور بے یقینی اور بے چینی کی فانی دنیا میں اگر اطمینان کی کوئی کرن ہے تو وہ اولیاء و صوفیاء کرام ہے۔ اگر آپ کو یقین نہ ہے تو ان کے مزاروں پر بے شمار مطمئن اور مجذوب لوگوں کا تانتا بندہ ہوا دیکھیے۔ قوالی اور صبا کی محافل میں دیوانوار جھومنے والے عقیدت مندوں کے اندر محبت و امن و آشتی کا امڑتا ہوا سیلاب ملاحظہ کریں۔ اس کیفیت جذب و شوق کو تصور کی آنکھ سے دیکھنے کی کوشش کریں جو ان کے اندر برپا ہے۔ یہ وہ پاکیزہ ہستیاں تھیں جو اصلاح معاشرہ اور عوام الناس کے فلاح و بہبود کے لیے ہمیشہ کفر و الحاد اور استبداد کی عالمگیر سیلاب کی راہ میں اہم رکاوٹ بن کر کھڑی رہیں۔ تصوف کی تاریخ میں ایسی کئی ہستیوں کے نام گنوائے جا سکتے ہیں جنہوں نے دنیا کو متاثر کیا اور پتھروں کی سینے میں ہریالی کاشت۔ صوفی مسالک و عقائد سے بالاتر ہو کر اللہ تعالیٰ کا قرب حاصل کر کے دوسروں کو اپنے گرد نور کے حالے میں سمیٹتا ہے۔ صوفی نفسانی خواہشات کو ضروریات بنانے سے باز رہتا ہے۔ صوفی اپنے لیے مر کر دوسروں کے لیے جینے کے اسباب پیدا کرنے کی سعی میں مگن رہتا ہے۔ عشق سہس علم نہ دے چہ حسلی گل مکتبہ، رحمان بابا فرماتے ہیں عشق سہس علم نہ دے چہ حسلی گل مکتبہ، مکتب حال دا مذہب وائی عشق سیوا دے مذہبہ۔ ترجمہ: تعلیم محبت تو ملے مکتب دل سے، دیگر کسی مکتب میں کہاں علم و ادب وہ، مکتب میں تو ہے مذہبی تعلیم کے طوطے، اور عشق کو مذہب سے نہ مطلب نہ طلب وہ۔ مذہب دلائل پر مبنی ہوتا ہے جبکہ تصوف یا عشق مذہب و مکتب اور محراب و منبر کی حدود و قیود سے آزاد ہو کر منزل مقصود کی جانب لپکتا ہے۔ جسم کی نفی کر کے روح کی راہ پر چلتا ہے۔ جسم اور روح کے درمیان ہر چند کے لمحوں کا فاصلہ ہے، مگر اس سفر میں صدیاں بھی لگ جاتی ہے۔ اس طرح رحمان بابا کے نفی ذات کا موضوع اردو کے مشہور صوفی شاعر خواجہ میر درد بھی یہاں واضح صورت میں پیش کرتے ہیں۔ باوجود یہ کہ پر و بال نہ تھے آدم کے، باوجود یہ کہ پر و بال نہ تھے آدم کے، وہاں پہ پہنچا کے فرشتے کا بھی مقدور نہ تھا۔ یا یہ شعر آپ سے ہم گزر گئے کب کے، آپ سے ہم گزر گئے کب کے، کیا ہے ظاہر میں گو سفر نہ کیا۔ علماء کرام نے مختلف اوقات میں مختلف پیرائے میں وضاحت کر کے بتایا ہے کہ تصوف وہ علم ہے جس کے ذریعے نفس کی پاکیزگی، اخلاق کی صفائی اور ظاہر و باطن کے بنانے کے احوال پہچانے جاتے ہیں۔ ہم کیوں پیدا ہوئے؟ پیدا ہونے سے پہلے ہم کہاں تھے؟ پیدا ہونے کے بعد ایک معینہ مدت یہاں رہنے کے بعد ہم کہاں چلے جاتے ہیں؟ انسان اور حیوان میں کیا فرق ہے؟ اگر ہم زندگی کا تجزیہ کر لیں تو یہ بات آشکار ہو جائے گی۔ بقول غنی خان، جون کا تشفرنی سٹلوی دا خسپے ہمشی سٹلے، جون کا تشفرنی سٹلوی دا خسپے ہمشی سٹلے، کا تش نسل زیاتولوی دا غوئے ہمشی کولے۔ مفہوم یہ ہوا کہ انسانی زندگی کا مقصد کھانا، پینا، سونا، جاگنا، گھر بنانا اور معاش کے لیے جد و جہد کرنا اور نسل بڑھانا ہی ہے۔ تو یہ سارے کام گائے، بکریاں اور پرندی بھی کرتے ہیں۔ انسان اور حیوانات میں سوچنے اور سمجھنے کی صلاحیت کا بہت فرق موجود ہے، اس لیے تو انسان اشرف المخلوقات کے بلند مرتبے پر فائز ہوا۔ اگر ہم مجموعی طور پر اللہ تعالیٰ کی ہستی کا تذکرہ کریں اور اللہ تعالیٰ کو سمجھنا چاہیں تو ہماری قلب و نظر کی دنیا ہمیشہ کے لیے منور ہو جائے۔ شال خان بابا فرماتے ہیں، ہر سکے نندارد حغ مخکڑم کہ لڈیر پیدائے ناپدید شو، ہر چیز میں اس چہرے کو ڈھونڈ رہا ہوں جو ہر سو موجود ہے مگر نظر نہیں آتا۔ میں اپنی باتیں سمیٹ رہا ہوں۔ یہاں بیج کی مثال دی جا سکتی ہے جو ایک دانہ ہونے کے باوجود اپنے اندر اتنا بڑا درخت، پتے، پھول، پھل، لکڑی اور نہ جانے کیا کچھ رکھتا ہے، مگر بظاہر یہ سب عقل سے بعید ہوتا ہے۔ انہی باتوں کے ذریعے ہم اللہ تعالیٰ کی ذات مبارکہ کے قائل ہوتے چلے جاتے ہیں اور یہی چیز روحانیت کی بنیاد بن کر ابھرتی ہے۔ ویسے تو اکثر شعراء کے ہاں تو دل میں تو آتا ہے سمجھ میں نہیں آتا، میں جان گیا ہوں تیری پہچان یہی ہے۔ ویسے تو اکثر شعراء کے ہاں تصوف کا رجحان ملتا ہے، لیکن وہ محض رسماً یا سامعین و قارئین کی دلچسپی کے حد تک ہے۔ ان میں پھر بھی بعض اشعار ایسے سامنے آتے ہیں جو تصوف اور راہ سلوک کے وسیع مفاہیم و مضامین سے بڑھ کر جامعیت رکھتے ہیں۔ مثلاً غالب کا یہ مشہور شعر، اسے کون دیکھ سکتا یگانہ ہے وہ یکتا، اسے کون دیکھ سکتا کہ یگانہ ہے وہ یکتا، جدوئی کی بو بھی ہوتی تو کہیں دوچار ہوتا۔ شعر کو عروض سمجھنے والے صحیح ادا کرتے ہیں کہ اسے کون دیکھ سکتا کہ یگانہ ہے وہ یکتا، جو دوئی کی بو بھی ہوتی تو کہیں دوچار ہوتا۔ اس شعر میں اللہ کی وحدانیت اور شرک و تثلیث کے تمام عقائد پر رد کا سادہ اور منطقی انداز لاجواب ہے، لیکن راہ سلوک اور تصوف سے متعلق سب سے گہرا رنگ اردو کی صوفی شاعر خواجہ میر درد کے ہاں نظر آتا ہے۔ خوشحال خان خٹک کے مذکورہ شعر ہی کا مضمون درد کے ہاں اسی طرح پایا جاتا ہے۔ جگ میں آ کر ادھر ادھر دیکھا، جگ میں آ کر ادھر ادھر دیکھا، تو ہی آیا نظر جدھر دیکھا۔ وحدت الوجود کی چاپ رکھنے والا یہ شعر اپنے باطن میں کائنات میں پھیلی ہوئی خدا کی قدرتوں اور کمالات کی انتہاؤں کی تفصیل لیے ہوئے ہے۔ انسانی فطرت کے بارے میں سوچا جائے کہ پیدائش سے لے کر مرنے تک ایک تسلسل کے ساتھ دل کی دھڑکن کس بنیاد پر قائم ہے، رگوں میں خون کی گردش، بھوک، پیاس، جسم سے فاسد مادوں کا اخراج، بندہ جتنی گہرائی میں سوچتا چلا جاتا ہے پردے کھلتے چلے جاتے ہیں۔ کائنات میں تمام چیزیں انسان کے لیے ہے، مگر انسان اس کے لیے کیا کرتا ہے؟ یہاں بھی اخلاقی حدود و قیود کی جانب اشارہ محسوس ہوتا ہے۔ رحمان بابا نے فرمایا، ہر چاہتا دزان پہ نظر گورا کا دانائے، ہر چاہتا دزان پہ نظر گورا کا دانائے، اے عبد الرحمن جہان ٹول عبد الرحمن دے۔ ترجمہ، اگر دانائی عزیز ہے تو سب کو اپنے جیسا سمجھو، اگر دانائی عزیز ہے تو سب کو اپنے جیسا سمجھو، اے عبد الرحمن ساری دنیا عبد الرحمن ہے۔ ولایت یہ ہے کہ ولی کا قول و فعل ایک ہو جائے۔ جب تک عمل میں تعصب، بغض، اناد اور نفرت کا عنصر موجود ہے اور عملی طور پر انسانیت کا احترام واضح نہیں، تب تک اللہ کی قربت کا دعویٰ بیکار ہے۔ صوفی ہمیشہ گناہ سے نفرت کرتا ہے، مگر گنہگار سے کبھی نفرت نہیں کرتا۔ نفرت ایک جنونی عمل ہے جس کو صوفی فتح کر کے محبت میں تبدیل ابھی رہتا ہے، لیکن میں اکتفا اسی پہ کر لیتا ہوں۔ بہت شکریہ، نوازش آپ کی سماعتوں کا بہت شکریہ۔
Thank you very much, Honorable Dr. Yusuf Zai. Next, our distinguished speaker is Dr. Marcia Hermanson from Loyola University, Chicago, United States. I would like to request her to please come onto the stage and deliver her remarks.
So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. And let me start out while they're making the slides a little bigger. I would like to thank the organizers of the conference, the Muslim Institute, the National Language Academy, and a special thanks to Sultan Sahib. And I would like to dedicate today's presentation to him. And I would also like to thank all those who have worked so tirelessly to bring this conference into being. So after I heard the last wonderful presentation, I thought of a new subtitle for this talk, which would be From Khalq to Khuluq to Tahalluk. And if you hear the presentation, hopefully you will understand, or maybe I should just translate what I mean by that triad. Khalq, the creation, right? Cosmology. Khuluq, the great character, the cultivation of virtues. And tahalluk is from the thought of Ibn Arabi, which involves the human being being able to take on the divine qualities. And that is the basis of my talk today, inshallah. I'm going to briefly, in the limitations of time, speak a little bit about classical theory of the Asma al-Husna. And of course, this subject is an ocean, right? So today we just have maybe a small vessel from the ocean, hopefully more than a drop, but certainly not the whole ocean. And then I'm going to move to something that is, I think, very new to you. I'm going to talk about Western Sufi, Americans, Britishers, how they are employing the Asma al-Husna as a spiritual practice. So the Asma al-Husna, and inshallah they'll be able to make this a little bigger, but I think you will be okay. Apologies to those in the back, but don't worry, I don't really read that much from the slides. Usually I just use them to jog my memory while I'm talking, because I like to have a visual cue. So as this audience knows very well, the divine names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are derived from the Quran and also the hadith, and in particular, there's more than one, but there's a hadith from at-Tirmizi, which lists 99 names. But of course, lists of the divine names can go beyond that. They can vary a little bit. So there are revealed Naqli sources for the idea of the divine names. Now, commenting on the divine names was very popular in the Islamic tradition, and there are more than 150 books that are written classically about the Asma al-Husna. Those who have studied more specifically, in detail than I, the whole history of these divine name commentaries, say they kind of go through, they're in three main genres, and those genres develop historically. Number one, philological, the linguistic study of the names. For example, Ar-Rahim, how is that related to the root Rahama, and so on? That would be a philological approach. Which names come together? That's philological. Everybody gets that? Theological would be like the debates between the Mu'tazila and the Ashariya. What is the relation of the names to the Zat, right? Are they separate? How close they are? That would be a theological discussion. Our topic today, since we are in a Sufi conference, is the Sufi or the mystical commentaries on the divine names. So in classical Sufism, some of you may be familiar with this. there is, for example, Al-Qushayri has the Shar al-Asma Allah al-Husna, and he explains the 99 names. There's a preface, and then he takes the names one at a time. But this is what we might call discussing. He discusses spiritual lessons that are derived from the name. So it's in the genre of the virtues. Human beings learn the names, and they can cultivate some of the virtues, that's the khuluq, based on the names. Also, Al-Ghazali, by the way, are we able to make these slides larger? I'm still kind of waiting for that to happen. Tech people? Yes, no? Okay. So this is a page from a translation of Al-Ghazali, the 99 beautiful names, speaking of Al-Ghazali's approach. And Al-Ghazali also takes an ethical approach to the names. It is relevant for human beings to know the names of Allah. At the same time, there needs to be a firm distinction between the divine being and the human, right? That is the classical Asherite theological position. And that is, the meanings of the names are ethically relevant, but still human beings, while they are not the same. I'm sure you've heard this discussion, right? Allah is Rahim. We human beings can aspire to be compassionate, but Allah is the all-merciful, but we human beings can have some trace of that mercy. That would be the approach of those Sufi commentators in the theological Asherite virtue tradition. Now we're going to note a shift from virtue to being, and I bet you can guess when that happened, with Ibn Arabi and his school, the Akbari school. So Ibn Arabi and his school would assert that only Allah is real, and the everything that other than Allah is derivative, is a reflection, is a tajalli. So you see there's a shift there, right? From the separation to a kind of unity, which some scholars have called an ontological, I know that's the big word, ontological being, wujud. So the Akbari school is more about wujud and the names as a guide to wujud. But we also see another trajectory in Sufi appropriation of the divine names, with a close contemporary of Ibn al-Arabi, At-Tilimsani. And with Tilimsani, you see emerging the use of the divine names in a way that we may call, and by the way, I think you get it, this is, what would you say, academic history of thought lecture, and maybe some sociology as well. But I think you can feel a trace of the Sufi mysticism, the Sufi hall, if you will, behind it. So back to At-Tilimsani, he and his followers start to use the names in what we would call academically a magical way. Reciting the names can do something in the world. I'm reminded of the remarks of Sultan Sahib this morning, where he was giving that example of somebody getting a murshid, right? Somebody getting a murshid to cure their animals or breathe on some salt or do something like that. And brother Sultan Sahib said, you might recite some divine names like Ya Latif, or, that would be what scholars would call a kind of magical healing use as the names, which can also be for psychological healing of the ailments of the soul. So more and more, even Al-Qushayri in the Rasala speaks of the murshid assigning the recitation of names to a disciple. So the idea of reciting the names as a spiritual and healing practice, it's not totally new. I mean, it's there before Tilmsani, but that more, if you will, what we call thaumaturgic or magical use is somewhat later. Now we quickly come to Ibn Arabi and the divine names, because he is the one who really elaborates on their use in a understanding in a cosmological way in the Al-Futuhat al-Makkiyah, but also in a small treatise, which is now translated into English, Insha al-Dawa'ir, the creation of circles. And there Ibn Arabi has almost a mythology of the divine names being, shall we say, at the the highest state in the realm of non-being, and the names want to come into existence with the tajalliyat. So one of the names, the generous, almost implores that the door be open for all of the divine names to come into the universe. So remember, wujud, everything is a reflection of the real through the Asma al-Husna. And of course, the Akbarian school is a huge influence on Sufi thought, including the Sufi poets that we are speaking of today. But you have different trajectories. You have the South Asian school of Akbarian Sufi interpreters, as well as a strong Ottoman influence. So I'm sorry you can't see this bigger, but the point that I'm showing this diagram, you have a circle of the signs of the zodiac, you have a circle of the planets, you have a circle of the letters of the Arabic alphabet, you have a circle of the different mansions of the moon, and then you have different Asma al-Husna. So it is a kind of understanding of the cosmos as having these, if you will, distinct parts, energies. And remember, later Sufism becomes more and more humanistic. So we could say even with Rumi, I mean, on the one hand, Ibn Arabi is explaining the process of descent, of the breath of the merciful, of the tajalliyat into the cosmos. But Rumi is speaking of the reed flute. So the human being is, the divine breath is breathing through we human beings. And that is our path of return to Allah through experience in this world. So you have this humanistic phase of ascent, and the divine names are going to be clues along the way, because in Ibn Arabi's thought, each one of us is a unique combination of the Asma al-Husna. So he who knows his Lord knows himself, or she who knows her Lord knows herself. And by contemplating and perhaps even doing practices, reciting the divine names, one sees within, and this is part of the practice of ascent. So dhikr, the remembrance of Allah, also can include recitation of the divine names to ascend and return to the source. And of course, in later Sufism, names become associated with various lata'if, with, there's a whole mapping of the names onto the body. Now we are going to shift. That was an introduction to classical Sufis and the divine names. Now I'm going to talk about contemporary Western Sufi practices that are derived from Ibn Arabi's understanding of the divine names. I'm going to use ideas from Islamic studies, religious studies, and I'm also going to introduce you to some Western Sufi movements. And part of my, what we call a toolbox part of my way of thinking about these things also involves concepts from sociology, such as new religious movements, religion and modernity, psychology, depth psychology, Freud, Jung, Kohut, a third wave humanistic psychology, and body work. So we will come to understand why the divine names are appealing to practitioners of Sufism, I'm putting that in scare quotes, who are living in the West. Some of the key concepts of Ibn Arabi. This is part of classical Sufi thought, but you will see that it appeals to modern people. Ibn Arabi, I was a hidden treasure and I wanted to be known. كنت كنز مخفي وأردت أن أعرف. So I was a hidden treasure and I wanted to be known. The divine being, Allah, knows God's self through our human experience. That's a little bit like Rumi and the flute, right? Our human experience is very important. Can you see how that appeals to modern people, even those living in the West? Also, tahalluq, human being, this is Ibn Arabi, tahalluq, human beings are able to cultivate the divine qualities in themselves. Now it's interesting the relationship between universities and academic scholars of Ibn Arabi and people who are practicing spiritual cultivation. So they are reading the works of the scholars. So one of the earliest scholars who published on Ibn Arabi in English was Afifi, an Egyptian scholar who wrote about Ibn Arabi. And later then, so I think Afifi, sorry I didn't look it up, when he published like 50s, 60s. But then the works of Henry Corbin. So there was a French scholar called Henry Corbin. Anyone ever hear of Henry Corbin? Okay, he was a French scholar and he looked at ancient Iran. For example, ancient Iran, he was very fascinated by Iran, Shiism, Sheikhism, different currents of esoteric thought, but also he was interested in Ibn Arabi. So he has a book, Creative Imagination, in the works of Ibn Arabi, where he talks about many things, but one that might interest you, and it's related to the topic, is the idea of himma. Himma. So the Akbarian himma is being able to concentrate your thought. That's the creative imagination. Sort of like takhayyul, but not takhayyul like imagination, but like almost like bringing things into being connected to the alam al-mathal, right? So it's Sufi cosmology. There's a reality above our reality. We human beings, by spiritual practice and by concentration, can almost be involved in the process of creation, right? Now, I think you can see why that would also appeal to modern Westerners. And there are many other interpreters of Ibn Arabi in the West, British, French, American, Spanish. Europeans are very fascinated by Ibn Arabi, and I have to say there is now an explosion of scholarships and translations of Ibn Arabi that did not exist before. But Sufism in the West comes in different flavors. In an early paper, which you can access on academia.edu under my name, I wrote a paper called The Garden of Western Sufi Movements, and it was a kind of metaphor. So in that garden there are perennials, hybrids, and transplants. Today we're not going to talk about the transplants. Those are mainly immigrant Sufis to the West who keep on practicing like they do in Pakistan or Egypt. But the perennials are people like René Guénon, Fritjof Schuon, Syed Hussein Nasser, that there's one perennial truth, and all religions and all mysticisms is a manifestation of the perennial truth. But often, it varies, but often the perennials are universalists. Sufism is universal. It existed before Islam, and maybe it's Sharia light or maybe no Sharia at all, right? Sufism is like a mysticism. Hybrids begin to emerge mainly in like the 1980s, and those are when Sufi teachers come to America or Europe from Turkey, from India, from Pakistan, and they attract both co-ethnics and they attract some Westerners. So those are two groups. I'm going to talk about them quickly, being mindful of the time. So first, we're going to talk about some perennial Sufis and how they use the divine names. Is everybody ready? So you guys you're tired after lunch, right? You should have a sip of water, breathe a little bit, get lively. So one of the theories of religion in America is Americans like their religion to be therapeutic. What does that mean? They want religion to do something for you. Heal you if you're sick, make you get rich if you're poor. Like, that's therapeutic, right? Doing something. So the universal Sufis, the perennial Sufis, they will want to practice Sufism in a way that they are getting healthier, that they are having deeper psychological knowledge that's therapeutic. Often they do not talk so much about Islam, maybe not at all, but they'll talk about Sufi psychology or Sufi healing. Perennials and universalists are more about private spirituality. They may not go to the masjid. In fact, I would say demographically they're unlikely to be involved with the Muslim communities. So there are a lot of different ones. I'll say a little bit about the Inayatiyya. I won't say as much about traditionalist Sufis. If you like, I can ask in the question period. Well, hopefully this is a little bigger. I don't know has anyone ever heard of Sufi Inayat Khan? Sufi Inayat Khan. You guys never heard of Sufi Inayat Khan? Oh, somebody heard. I'm actually asking not just to test your knowledge. I want to know, like, should I explain? Okay? So I'm getting a sense I should explain a little bit. So you give me a little more time because I have to explain. So Sufi Inayat Khan was from Baroda, now known as Vadodara, in India. And he was a musician, Muslim musician, a very top musician. I think he played the veena. But anyway, he had a Chishti Murshid in Hyderabad, and that Murshid instructed him to go to the West. So in 1910, he came to America and he lived in Europe and he attracted many disciples. And so Inayat Khan, his sons, so Inayat Khan passed away at unusually, he in one of the flu epidemics. He went to India and he tragically passed away in 1927. But then his brothers and sons continued this teaching. So this is one of the most well-known forms of Sufism in the West, various lineages. Now, the one that I think is going to be the most fascinating for you is one called the Ruhaniyat branch of this Sufi order. And this is a book here, and you might get interested in this book. It's called A Sufi View of the 99 Names of God, Physicians of the Heart. And it is written by Western Sufi teachers and psychologists and scholars of Arabic who are involved in this branch of the Inayatiyya that there was an American guy, Samuel Lewis, who became a disciple of Inayat Khan. And he continued those teachings. So the branch that comes through him is called the Ruhaniyat. And this book, this is their website. So I want to say the divine names, there's a book that is based on like modern Western psychology about, if you have problems with your relation with your parents or if you have a problem with your relationship with God, these things are related. And so you have to work with both, and you can use a certain divine name, reciting a divine name to work on that problem you might have with your mother, your father, or your spiritual life. Now, of course, Americans might not know how to pronounce a divine name, so you can go and listen to that name being pronounced so that you can learn. But by the way, you can choose, do you want Arabic pronunciation or do you want Indo-Pakistani pronunciation of that divine name? And you can choose the one you prefer to do your wazifa. But also, note it, you probably can't read it, it's small. It says, coming soon, there's going to be a board game. So people are going to be able to learn about the Asma al-Husna, sort of like, by drawing cards. And in fact, there already are cards. These are called wazifa cards. It's a deck of 99 cards, and each one has a divine name, and it briefly explains that name. So, the noun rizq formed from its root means a gift of blessing from which all can benefit, etc., etc. So this is a way for people to learn and maybe even to do a kind of divination. You have your deck of the Asma al-Husna. What should you be concentrating today? You take one of the divine names and you can meditate on it. But you can go online and you can take courses. And these courses have been recorded. So you can meet in a group and you can participate in learning about the Asma al-Husna. Where did these ideas come from in the Ruhaniyat? From Inayat Khan, because Inayat Khan, that Indian Sufi, talked a lot about the descent of the soul from Lahut, Jabarut, Malakut into Nasut. So again, the soul comes down and then the soul returns. Of course, this is pure Ibn Arabi, beginning with Ibn Sina, it's Islamic cosmology. But you also have in the book Buddhist teachings, you have contemporary psychology, you have different zikrs. Now, Samuel Lewis, I mentioned this American, he was both a Zen master and a Sufi teacher. And he passed away, I think, in the very late 60s, like 1969. But he worked with an American teacher of dance, and they created something called Sufi dances. Sufi dances, where people, don't think of like disco dance. Think more like people doing, sort of like Helveti dervishes, or Mevlevis. Think of Mevlevi. You have a lot of people here dressed in the Mevlevi thing. So an idea of a choreographed celebration of the divine. But Samuel Lewis also taught walks. So somebody needs to be more Jalali. So they will do a kind of Jalali walk. They will walk with kind of a macho movement, and they might be reciting some wazifa, some divine name like Yahai, Yahai, which of course, if you go to Istanbul, that's what the Helveti dervishes do. But here you have a group of Americans who are, standing in a circle and saying that. So this is it. Now this is the son of Inayat Khan, is the older figure on the left. That's Pir Vilayat Khan, who wrote about the divine names, and the current head of the order is Zia Inayat Khan, and sometimes he comes to Pakistan and he has disciples here. So I'll just say a little bit about Inayat Khan's teachings on the divine names. He calls them wazifa, of course, which is an Indian Sufi term for being assigned some zikr, some shughul, some practice. And he also calls them mantras, because Inayat Khan came from India. So there's a lot of crossover, chakras, latifas. So it's kind of new, we could say new agey, right? It's kind of a mix of Hindu and Islamic spirituality. So take, for example, the divine name Alim, Ya Alim. So Alim for Vilayat Khan is associated with this chakra here, whereas Fatah, the Ah, is associated with the heart. So you have a kind of mysticism of sound and a combination of Islam, Hinduism, and also kind of body, understanding that you are doing things with vibrations, right? Vilayat Khan also used the interpretation of Ibn Arabi, which he took from Henry Corbin, with whom he studied at the Sorbonne in the 1930s. There's a passage from Vilayat Khan that shows this kind of mixture of Hindu and Islamic thought. He says, sound is like waves of energy, like shabd or saut sanamadi, the mysticism of sound. Why do you recite these wazaif? Because the sound takes you beyond linear thinking. And you're American. Why are you reciting it in Arabic or Sanskrit? Because these languages make you more aware of the sound. You get the idea? How the divine names are being used. And also there's a lot of material from classical Sufism. There's a scholar of Sufism, Karl Ernst, who writes about Sufism in India and Pakistan. And one of his chapters on modernity, he calls it, something like the unveiling of the secret. For centuries, these Sufi practices were passed down from the murshid to the murid. But then you have printed books. So you can get some, like even Shah Waliullah, he wrote this book, Altaf al-Quds, about the Lataif. But then when you have print in the 1800s, you have a lithograph. So anybody can buy that book, right? You don't need a murshid, you buy the book. So nowadays, the public, right? The public can know about these practices and ideas that used to be very limited. So Pir Vilayat, for example, he speaks about using a mental image when you're reciting Wahhab. You say, Wahrabu, Wahrabu, and you think of water flowing in your mind because that is the quality of the divine name. So you are using like meditation and so on to bring these divine names into manifestation. These are some courses in the lineage, so you can take a course in the divine names. The influences, I think I've already mentioned, are the Anayatiya order, Indian Sufism with a Kubrawi influence, creative imagination, Jungian psychology. I got the signal that I need to wrap up pretty quickly. I hope you got the idea that there's a lot of material. So there's another group in England that some scholars have called post-religious. There was a Turkish guy, Bülent Rauf, who died in 1987. He established something called the Bashara Center, which were universal Sufis, and there's actually a book about them if you get interested by Suhat Haji Faruqi. They use Ibn Arabi, but again, they're a bunch of British folks, so they basically had, in those days, like a Xerox of some pages from Afifi's writings on Ibn Arabi, and they used to get together and study it. But you can see their website is actually very sophisticated. They have a magazine, courses, and they founded something called the Ibn Arabi Society. Ibn Arabi Society, you can Google it, which is a combination of Western people who are using Ibn Arabi for personal transformation and scholars, academic scholars who they patronize, and they have conferences. So Ibn Arabi is kind of not just an academic thing, but it is like a personal interest. So people in this order, for example, the Muhyiddin Ibn Arabi Society, they have translated Ibn Arabi's wird to recite. So it's sort of, you can have kind of Sufism without a murshid, right? You have the book and you're reading the wird of Ibn Arabi. Now, hybrid Sufi movements, these are the Islamic ones, and I just want to show you, these are some of the Sufi leaders who came and brought Islamic Sufism to the West, and many of them wrote on the divine names. This is Bawai Muhyiddin. This is the Helveti, the Turkish Helveti order under Muzaffar Ozak. This is the 99 names of Allah. This is another person from the same order, the named and the named. This is another hybrid teacher, Sheikh Jamal. And this is an online class. So all of these groups have online classes, and knowing the names of Allah is one of the main popular things. This is a book written by one of the followers, reciting the 99 names to the rhythms of the heart. You can go and register for an intensive zikr class. Wow, this one is upcoming November 2025. So you can get on board early if you want to join. So these Islamic Western movements, they do not talk so much about Buddhism and Hinduism. They talk about other Sufis along with Ibn Arabi. They are more devotional in using the divine names and less about Western psychology. And if they are magical, like one of the books, you know, she says, well, it's said that if you recite this divine name, it will repel enemies. Wallahu alam. You know, like she's a little uncomfortable with that. So I'm wrapping it up quickly. We're at the conclusions. These are just some of the currents between Western Sufi uses of the divine names. Of course, the classical Islamic tradition, Sufism, Ibrahim al-Qurani in the Hijaz, the Indian Sufis who used Ibn Arabi, the Ottomans, Western scholars, 20th century psychology, and the modern self. And why are Westerners interested in the divine names? Some scholars say we have shifted. I think this is relevant to some of the discussions you've already heard in this conference. People looking for murshids. How do you be a good person today? So you are coming from a culture of I shouldn't stereotype, right? Traditionally, Pakistani Muslim culture could be termed a culture of duty. Duty to your parents, duty to the watan. You had those realms of relationships. What happens when a culture modernizes? It could become a culture of choice. Pick and mix. I'm going to do yoga, right? You have it right here. And I'm not saying it's bad, by the way. I'm just describing it, right? You might do yoga. Actually, I sat on the bus from Lahore, and the lady beside me, she said she does energy healing and Reiki. You know, so it's already here in Pakistan, right? The culture of choice. The individual is the seeker. The person can decide how they're going to be religious. It is multi-religious, so you can have New Age, you can have Buddhist. People say, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. And the divine names are spiritual. And academic studies also play a big role. And people want, as I earlier mentioned, they want to be healed. They want to grow. They want their spirituality and the religion to make them better. And that is the conclusion. Thank you so much for your attention.
I would like to request both our distinguished speakers to take their seats on the stage so we may begin the interactive session. Before we begin the session, just a quick request to keep your questions short and to the point. Who wants to go first? Yes, please, you in the back. Can we get a mic to the gentleman at the back?
Assalamu alaikum. Hi ma'am. First of all, I would like to say that you have given a wonderful presentation on from cosmology to psychology, especially focused on Ibn Arabi, and which is famous in East. I would like to congratulate you that you have done so much effort, so much research on it. And my question is about Ibn Arabi, and you know it well. The Western researchers that you have mentioned, from Afifi to Henry Corbin, William Chittick, and James Morris, they all have described ontological, cosmological, and every aspect of Ibn Arabi. And the Western researchers know it. But modern Sufis who are practicing Sufism for spiritual healing using Ibn Arabi, they are particularly focusing on spiritual healing, like psychological perspective. But we know Ibn Arabi have a strong point of view about cosmological aspect and metaphysical reality, which he affirms, because particularly he is a cosmologist. He is a metaphysical Sufi. He has strong convictions about the worldview he has. So my question is there any possibility that adopting Sufism for spiritual healing can West adopt those cosmological and metaphysical perspective of Ibn Arabi as well? Is there any possibility they can move from psychology to cosmology or metaphysics?
Yes, thank you so much for your learned question and for getting to the point and actually asking a question. But I think the premise of the question, I mean, what I would say is that Ibn Arabi's cosmology is playing in the background. In other words, they are not the cosmology, and I actually cited, maybe it was a bit quick, I know it was overwhelming maybe, but I talked about I was a hidden treasure and I wanted to be known. I mean, that is cosmological, right? It is, everything is a manifestation, a tajalli of the ultimate. That's cosmological. But if you understand that each person is a combination of the divine names, that's cosmological also, but it becomes psychological if you say, oh, you're too Jamali, you better go recite a Jalali name, for example. That is healing. So there's a relationship between the two, which I'm not sure, again, I will repeat, Ibn Arabi is interested in the process of descent. You know, another term for Sufism, especially in Iran, is irfan. So the idea is if you know the cosmology, if you know that about that process of descent, then you sort of have the map and you can merge into that. But that's actually pretty difficult. What I would say is on the spiritual path, some seekers, irfan, knowing the cosmology, that will be their path, right? That will be their path. But for many individuals, it may be much more the path of ishq, majzub. So knowing it is really not going to take them there, right? They need something more experiential, if I can put it that way. But suluk would be like if you give somebody a book and say, this is what the universe looks like, that is not going to take you to Allah, for most people. You have to go through some kind, and that is the dilemma, right? What is the inner work? So do you go and do chilla and recite a name, recite divine names for so many hours, and then you might get a certain hal, certain kaifiyat, but is that going to give you good character, right? Is that going to bring you closer to Allah? I think that is a little bit the subject of this whole conference, actually, the spiritual path. So definitely the cosmology is important. But knowing the cosmology, right, like having big aql, having good understanding, it is not going to take you there unless you have that other part. And I think that's the human part, the healing part, the attraction of that part. I hope that answers.
Thank you, Dr. Marsha. Next question. We have time for one more quick question. Please keep it short.
Because I have already asked, so when you say keep it short, it becomes difficult because, very good talks both by Abbasin. When Abbasin Yusuf says, Malidale de Raftar de Dervishano, yes, it's metaphysics, but when I see the Arabic knowledge of the madam, it was really nice talk. So when we talk about the cosmology, so the matter-energy relationship, the Einstein theories and things like that. So when we see that, I just ask a quick question that can all the big scientists who have contributed a lot to the human beings and akhlaqiyat, takhalluq and takhliq actually, so can they be called Sufis as well? Because they work in the middle of matter and energy.
Good
Thank
question.
you, please.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, that is a huge question. You know, if you're in the West today, I guess anybody who wants to be a Sufi can kind of say, I'm a Sufi. And by the way, I'm not saying that in a disparaging way, right? So, you know, in I think it's Al-Hujwiri, right? Or maybe it's Surari who talks about, I think it's Hujwiri talks about, you know, the Sufi, the Mutasawwif, the Mustaswif, you know, like a Sufi wannabe. So there are those who are like on the inside and they say, call me a Sufi. And then there are those, you seem to be saying, hey, we have fellow travelers among the scientists who are working on the edge of matter and spirit. Let's call them Sufis too. And then we also can invoke Data Sab. I think you all know this one, right? Once Sufism was a reality without a name. Now Sufism is a name without a reality. Wallahu alam.
I want to add something more, if you allow. जैसा कि आपने फरमाया कि सूफ़ी कैसे होता है, सूफ़ी के बारे में कोई ये नहीं कह सकता कि ये सूफ़ी है, लोग कह सकते हैं, कोई नहीं ये नहीं कह सकता कि मैं सूफ़ी हूँ, लोग कहते हैं कि ये सूफ़ी है। तो उसके लिए कोई टाइटल मुकर्रर नहीं है कि कोई बंदा अपने लिए कोई कुर्सी कोई मुकाम तयन करे कि मैं यहाँ बैठा हूँ और मैं सूफ़ी हूँ, कभी नहीं। सूफ़ी लोग करार देते हैं कि ये बंदा, इसके अखलाकियात, इसका किरदार माशरे में सूफ़ी की हैसियत से मुसल्लम है, तो उसको सूफ़ी कहा जाता है। कोई अपने आप को सूफ़ी नहीं कहता और ना कह सकता है।
Thank you very much. We'll move on with the session. Yes, please, Chairman.
वो हमारे एक अजीज़ थे, वो कहते थे कि जो सूफ़ी नहीं है वो भी झूठ बोलता है और जो सूफ़ी है वो भी झूठ बोलता है। क्योंकि जो सूफ़ी नहीं है वो झूठ बोलता है कि मैं सूफ़ी हूँ, और जो सूफ़ी है वो अपने आप को डिनाई करता है और वो कहता है कि मैं सूफ़ी नहीं हूँ। तो ये तो कहानी नफ़ी इस्बात की है, और इस मामले में जो अपनी नफ़ी करता है अल्लाह उसका इस्बात करता है।
Subhanallah. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. Besides having distinguished speakers, we're also fortunate to have a very distinguished chair of the session, Professor Dr. Arabella Bhutto, who is a Vice Chancellor of SABS University, as well as the University of Sufism and Modern Sciences. She has a PhD in Business Management from Nottingham University Business School, as well as a postdoc from University of Utah. She's a member of the HEC, senior personnel of the LCI project by NSF USA, also a Michigan State University Fellow in the Women Leadership Program, as well as many distinguished accolades. I would like to request Honorable Professor to come to the stage and deliver the chair remarks.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Watuizu mantasha, watuzillu mantasha. Well, at the outset, I am really glad and honored to be a part of this very important conference. And in fact, when I was invited, I was also told that because you are a vice chancellor of two universities, so you have to do two tasks. The first task, of course, would be to be a chair of a session and conclude what my marvelous speakers have already talked about. Then at the same time, there's something which we do at our universities and that I would like to share with you in a form of presentation. So I'll be doing or wearing the two hats, a small of presentation for you, and of course, a conclusion of this wonderful event. So if I need to conclude the two wonderful speakers have talked about, I think there's only one word and one phrase come to my mind, and that is La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. And why I'm saying it, because this session in fact talked about both divines. This session is talk about the divine names of Allah Pak. So I am there with the La ilaha illallah. But then it talks about the Aswa Husna of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So to me, this session is all about the reflection of this one statement, and I think that says everything. Beyond that, I do not say any capacity in me to talk about it. So going beyond that, let me share with you something that we are doing at University of Sufism and Modern Sciences at Pitcha. But then at the same time, being a Vice Chancellor of a university, SABS University of Art, Design and Heritages, we are in fact trying to bridge the Sufism concepts with the modern technologies while using artificial intelligence, because this point has been raised by a couple of the dignitaries sitting here when they were asking questions, can we really opt this artificial intelligence for the Sufism or not? So I think my presentation would try to reflect on some of the points that and some of the actions that we are doing there in universities. So let me move ahead with this topic, which in fact will talk about the case study of EcoArt Green Latif Summit. I will share with you some of the reflections, some of the work that we have already done there. So as we go on with any presentation, we create some underpinning on it, and for the underpinning, of course, we came up with certain definitions, we talk about some basic concepts that I also touch upon, but my concept or my work would be related to a Sindhi poet, and this Shah Abdul Latif Bhitai. I will not be going into the much depth that what lessons we have learned from that poetry, but my concept and my scope would be related to that how this poetry can be shifted to the Gen Z. We were talking about Z and H earlier. So I would like to give you some methodologies or new ways or new pedagogies that we use in our institution. And while using those new pedagogies in our institution, we want to inculcate the knowledge of our Sufis in the Gen Z. So I will share some of the work with this, in which we again, as I mentioned, I'll be talking about the EcoArt Green Latif example. So we all are aware, Sufism, it's mystical Islamic belief and practices. So the two words go hand in hand. It's not only a belief, but it's more about practice. So if we believe on something and if we don't practice, it would be more of like call and fail mein tazad aa jata hai. So this is something, of course, we need to bridge, and we need to start with the belief and then bringing it into the practice. Because as much as we practice, as much as we go in repetition, as much as there is a concept that we learn and also we shift. So what we are doing, in fact, is trying to understand this concept of tasawwuf at our universities, but then again try to reflect on that tasawwuf with this new pedagogy that we have designed there. So when you see into that word tasawwuf, if you look up into its particular definition, it has been derived from the Arabic word of saf. And saf, in fact, reflects the wool. So when we say tasawwuf, in fact, it's more about pressing yourself into the wool. So it is not only learning and not only understanding, but then making it a part of yourself. And when we make it a part of yourself, we have started living the life of Sufis. We know there are several practices are being reflected here, and we are aware that the Sufis do zikr, they love for the humanity, they have their engagement with the Allah Pak, they trust, they have tawakkul, and their practices includes the meditation, the reflection, and of course the fana. And then spiritual guidance. We already listened about the murshid and murid concept, but then they have different ways through which they reflect, through which they share their lessons and their knowledge with the society. So you know, some of them have the poetry, some of them propose the music, some of them even go for the dhamal. And we are saying all these practices still going on at the tombs of these Sufis. If I take few names of the Sufis from Sindh region, then of course at the top we have Shah Abdul Latif Bhitai. And when we say Shah Abdul Latif Bhitai, we can exactly connect the entire poetry, the entire philosophy of Shah Abdul Latif Bhitai with the living on world. He talks about nature, he talks about culture, he talks about the divine love. But his lessons have been consolidated, his philosophies have already been consolidated in a book which we call as Shahjo Risalo. So Shahjo Risalo means it's a book of Shah Latif Bhitai. And where we find most of the philosophies, it somehow talks about the entire life of an individual. Then of course we have Satchar Sarmas, we have Qazi Qaden, we have Rohal Rafiq. There are several names into the region in the Sindh province that in fact reflects upon these Sufi practices and Sufi lessons. But as I mentioned already, that when Sufis come into being, they do not only keep their knowledge with themselves. I was really fascinated by looking to those websites, the book, even the card game which was shared by our learned speaker here. So it means it is something that need to be making a part of our society. Unless we do not learn and shift this knowledge to the next generation, we may reflect on doing some very good speeches, but maybe in terms of practices, we are lacking somewhere. So what the Sufis have been doing, they have been promoting emotional, ethical and spiritual growth alongside their own intellectual development. What is our purpose here, standing here doing these conferences, is to of course understand that how we can align this basic knowledge that is already with us from the ancestors and how we can really make it a part of modern concept that we have today. So if we see in the modern concept, people are really talking about mindfulness, people are talking about character building, people are talking about empathy, creativity, ethical leadership. So it is something which is really very required in our society. And the concepts of different subjects have been reflected these words a lot. So we try to connect it with the existing subjects in the modern society today. You can find that Sufi practices are reflected everywhere. If you see into the social sciences, look up into the history, into the sociology, into the psychology, the reflection of these Sufi practices have already been observed. You can look up to the social harmony that we can see in history subject. We can talk about interfaith dialogue, which we can have an impact onto the sociology. In psychology, again, Sufi meditation and some emotional regulation have been practices into the classroom. So at Sufi University, what in fact we have done, we do not have a degree program in Sufism, but of course we have different disciplines that are seeking some knowledge from the Sufi practices. What we offer there is the IT program, what we offer there is education program, what we offer there is English program, and what we offer there is a business program. But when we start talking about English programs, rather than looking to the Oxford dictionary, we have started to work on Sufi dictionary. But when we talk about the businesses there, rather than looking to the leadership styles, we are looking to servant leadership style, we are started looking to ethical leadership style, the Sufi practices leadership. Similarly, when you look up into the education department, rather than only generally talking about different pedagogies, we are proposing the Sufi pedagogies. We are trying to reflect and connect these different disciplines which are coming or lessons coming from those Sufis in the modern societies. The purpose is to reflect on those knowledge and also make our Gen Z capable enough to understand with their pace of learning. So if we look up into the basic sciences, of course, biology, Sufi practices are coming there. We know ecological balance, we are talking about climate change. These issues have already been done. And from these Sufi practices, which I'll share as an example, how we can really think and work on it. In physics, we know the concept of light or noor. And in chemistry, again, alchemical symbolism, things exist there. Business administration, as I already talked about, the social responsibility, servant leadership, the ethical advertisement, they all can be connected with the concept who are coming from the Sufis. And when you talk about the information technology, of course, artificial intelligence, ethics, cybersecurity, ethical hacking, so you can just imagine how these different words can go hand in hand. So when I started to connect these different concepts that exist into the Sufism with the modern technologies, I came up with certain words. And those certain words I try to connect, but try to see how they can influence each other. If we look up to the modern concept of social and emotional learning, we have observed that through zikr and through muraqabah, it is possible that these kind of mindful and social emotional learning can be promoted. So what we started doing there, in fact, we came up with certain exercises that could help our student process emotional and ethical dimension, mirroring Sufi introspection. Moving on further, we have looked up to the concept of khidmat-e-khalq, and that in fact talks about the service to humanity, and we try to learn some lessons from it and apply it into the experiential learning and service learning. So again, it's a learning by doing, and what we try to do is to design certain projects where students can really solve the real world problems, which they could be connected to the poverty elevation, could be connected to the climate action, and so on. Then again, Sama and Kalam, which has been related to the music and poetry, and here in fact we connected to the creativity and art. And then again, when you see there's a STEM, science, technology, engineering and mathematics, but again word art has also been a part of it. When you look up into this all creativity styles that are not only promoting creation, but at the same time inculcation of the technical skills, we in fact ask our student to create some art which is relevant with the poetry, in which the lessons can be extracted out, lessons can be reflected out, and they can be converted into the form of illustrations, whether through fine arts or even generating the prompt through artificial intelligence. I can work up into the different media projects. Fana, again, it's a concept of ego, which talks about the purpose-driven learning. And in which what we do, we try to connect the education to the personal and societal goals. So we see that every individual has its own capacities, has their own skills. So we promote or we ask our students that how they can utilize their own skills and they can use it for the betterment of the society. So not only this, we then connected it to the sustainable development goals. Because this is the dire need of society today. And these sustainable development goals, rather going from number 1 to 17, we can say it's been starting from the no poverty and then reaching it to the partnership. Here what we have done, we have focused on different SDGs separately, but then seeking the activities and the skills from different kind of universities, of course that include University of Sufism and Modern Sciences and the SABS University of Art and Design. We in fact organized an international summit, and that international summit came up with the title of Eco Art, Green Latif, Nature and Culture. Now you can see in this event what we have done. We have learned the concept of poetry from University of Sufism and Modern Sciences, but then at the same time we came up with the art with the help of artists and designers in the university, SABS University of Art, Design and Heritages, and then we converted into the mathematical models. When you say mathematical modeling, it has been connected to the artificial intelligence, it is connected to the augmented reality, it is connected to the virtual reality. Looking at these very different kind of disciplines and then combining these different kind of disciplines, we left a very fascinating videos for you. So if you're interested, you can go and have a look to that video on the link available. And then we came up with a work which is very distinct in its nature. Now you can see this work is exactly reflection of a poetry of Shah Abdul Latif Bhittai. I will not read those entire poetries, but on the extreme right hand side of your screen, you have a Sindhi poetry written. So what we did with the Sindhi poetry, we translated it word by word. You can see in the table in the downside. So every word in every single box is a translation of a Sindhi every word. Now once they have been converted into this language, then the prompt being generated, but before doing that, we sat with the poets, we sat with the philosophers who in fact trying to tell the exact story of this poetry to the students, who will then convert it or generate the prompts. So it was more of like thinking exercise, the creativity exercise, where different philosophers, different artists, and different poets sat together. We had a long focus group discussions, and we learned lessons from the poetry. Then we allowed a student to reflect upon it. And they reflected not only in the form of AI prompts generated, you can see that's a work of an AI that's been there, but then at the same time, the artist came up with their own illustration. And those are visible in our galleries and even into the catalog box, which I will love to share with you. That's one of the work created. And then here you can see it's another work. So if I just read one poetry, the translated poetry for you, those drivers were well rewarded, who from ocean depth brought out gems, whose worth none can calculate. Now this in fact is the work which was only focused on Sustainable Development Goal number 13. So we have not really touched on all different concepts, but we only talked about the poetry which was related to flora and fauna. So जहाँ पर flowers की बात हो रही थी, जहाँ पर nature की बात हो रही थी, जहाँ पर animals की बात हो रही थी, we only touched onto that poetry. It was only some portion of the poetry of Shah Abdul Latif Bhittai which we worked upon. So again, there's another poetry, the rain originated and is formed within me, why should I think of clouds? So for the entire day, my beloved's cloud or recollection, do not leave me for a moment. It's again a translation. Another translation for which the prompt being generated and says, whales are not caught by spreading net in shawls, have good provision of the sea and net made of strong dyed cord. You are in shawl and hollow creeks, the deep is still away. It means, again, there are so many lessons from these poetries. And finally, there's another work which talks about flowers from which Jack Rowe were created. The clay is priceless. Such a precious flowers the creator created himself. So having said this, after doing this entire exercise, in the conference, in fact, we established the PAM Research Center. And PAM Research Center, in fact, talks about the poetry, art, and mathematics. And this entire research center is working and devising new curricula, because somebody was asking, can we really develop certain curricula through which we can share that lessons to the institute? And I'm really grateful to you, sir, for inviting me here and making me a part of this conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Professor Arabella Bhutto. That was really inspiring work to see how you've managed to develop that curriculum. Really inspiring to see. We would now like to request Honorable Chairman of the Muslim Institute, Sahibzada Sultan Ahmad Ali, to present the souvenir for the chair of the session, Honorable Professor Arabella Bhutto. Please, if you could receive your shield. I would now like to call the speakers one by one, starting with Dr. Marcia Hermansen to come down onto the floor to receive her shield for the participation. I would now like to request our honorable speaker, Professor Dr. Abbasin Yusuf Said, come down onto the floor, the shield for the. Would like to request all the distinguished speakers to stand together for a group photo. Please give everyone a round of applause for our distinguished speakers. An excellent session. That concludes our dialogue. Please join us for a quick tea break, and we'll commence with the next session afterwards. Thank you, everyone.